saying that the continuous decrease in interest rate done artificially by central banks is probably the main source, or the main reason for the current economic depression.
And
this new
other depressions
and other depression previously. What would differentiate this idea from the standard Austrian idea that says basically that it has been the continuous manipulation and reduction of interest rate under its market level what produces also the depression?
Yeah, distortions in the economy, malinvestments, M-A-L, malinvestments and so on, which the Austrians say. Well, basically it's the same idea. I feel I go a little bit deeper because I actually point out how individual enterprises suffer loss of capital, erosion or destruction of capital. I can put my finger on the actual disappearance or destruction of capital. In other words, the standard Austrian theory gives a broad view of it, but you want to focus on certain aspects. I think you have to go a little further, and that's what I'm trying to do.
In The Wealth of Nations has this beautiful metaphor about the highway and about these wings and the wings. When he explained his real will doctrine, at the end of his explanation, he says that this requires some prudence, and that if we do not have this prudence, we will probably and we have to choose under these circumstances, we will probably be sure to go not through the air, but to go back and go on the ground, to use the ground highway, meaning that under certain circumstances, like not having this prudence, we should have the 100% gold reserve.
Does he say that?
Yes.
He talks about 100%.
Well, he's meaning this. He's speaking about how the real bills allow you to go over, to go farther than the 100%, and that but we require prudence.
Well,
and
absolutely.
Without this prudence, it would be safer to go back to the earth and not go through the air. Could you comment on this? What is the prudence that is necessary to?
Oh yes, yes. I think what he says about this prudence, my recollection is he's talking about the dangers of over trading, which means trading too much, trying to squeeze more out of the trade than is justified by the economic facts. And this point is well taken. But I think it would be going too far to read into this that under certain circumstances real bills should be abandoned and go back to 100% gold standard. I think this is reading too much into Adam Smith. He does caution you that there is a possibility of overtrading, which is a very valid point.
Friedrich Hayek speaks about the moneyness and saying that Hayek speak about moneyness, meaning that money is rather more equality than anything else, and that in this sense all goods can be more or less have more or less quality of money.
Well, that's marketability.
More or less moneyness. Would you agree, or do you think there is a connection between this and what you say?
Well, this is what we have been talking about, the various degrees of marketability. But I don't think this would make other commodities money. However, there is a scenario which I don't think Hayek mentions, but I could add to it, that suppose the government bans the ownership and trade in gold. So gold is removed as the most marketable commodity. How will the market react to this? I would say the market will seek out the next most marketable commodity, which could be silver for the sake of argument. All right, then the government will ban silver as well. Both gold and silver are taboo. Government doesn't allow you to own or trade. What will the market do? Well, it will do the same thing, seek out the next. And if the government puts a taboo on that as well, then it just keeps continuing. So in this sense, what Hayek is saying, that potentially all the highly marketable goods could be money. And under what circumstances would they become money? The answer is, if the government will remove the best commodities as money from the market, then it's not the end of the market, because the market has the last word.
Some critics of your work that have maybe heard about your work, about simplifications of your work, say that your recommendation of your position are inflationists. Do you think that they are really inflationists, and why?
Well, you have to be more specific. The examples I can think of is that my defense of Adam Smith's real bill doctrine is being attacked, that when I am calling the real bill as a possible way of financing trade and the production of goods ready for the consumer, then I am being an inflationist, because I'm advocating the increase in the money supply. Because these real bills are, in a real sense, a means of exchange. They can be used as a purchasing means of purchasing, not just between producers, but maybe anybody else. And my answer to that is that according to the definition of inflation, any addition to the circulating media is inflationary if it's in excess of the goods which are ready for purchasing. But these real bills are not in excess, because they are backed up by the goods, maturing goods, which will reach the market in 91 days.
In a certain sense, could you say that this is 100% reserve banking, but not necessarily in gold?
Oh, absolutely. I reject the term fractional reserve banking, because it's not fractional. The banks are good banks. I admit there are bad banks too, and perhaps most banks are bad, but there are good banks as well, or theoretically there could be. A good bank will back all its liabilities with gold and the next best thing. Now, what is the next best thing to gold? The next best thing to gold is a bill of exchange which matures into gold. This is, for a bank, the best earning asset. Gold is the best asset, but it's not an earning asset. the bank is looking for earning assets to keep in business. And the most secure earning asset the bank can have is precisely a real bill.
How do you think that your theory and the present depression are related? Or how would you explain in a simple way your most original ideas with the present crisis and depression?
I would say that we are in this very difficult situation, not so much because of these errors which were made by banks and governments and so on, but the general ignorance centered around the concept of capital and the danger of capital destruction. And just as you started your question, that there is such a thing as capital destruction as a consequence of steadily declining interest rate. This is not recognized. But if you analyze the problem, you will come to the conclusion that this is at the root of the difficulties. And you can go a little further, because under the gold standard, interest rates are stable and bond speculation is unknown. There is no profit to be made if the interest rate is kept so stable as it is under the gold standard. So speculators will go to other fields. They are not going to speculate in bonds.
What is the importance of the mismatching of maturities in the understanding of the business cycle?
Oh, it's very important. It's very important. And the commercial banks make this mistake again and again of issuing credit, borrowing short and lending long, which is the mismatching of the maturities. They should not do that. This is arbitrage formally. Formally, it's an arbitrage. So you might say, if you are for free markets, well, arbitrage is one of the wonderful tools of free markets. So what's wrong with the banks doing what they like to do? They are borrowing short and lending long, which means that they are selling short-term debt instruments and buying long-term debt instruments. That's just an arbitrage. There's nothing wrong with that. Well, the answer is no. There is a taboo which they should not violate. Not the government, not the banks, and nobody else. And this is what I call illegitimate. What's the term I use? Illegitimate arbitrage? No, that's not what in my writings. It just escapes me for the moment. I coined a term which is something like that, illegitimate arbitrage. Anyhow, this is a taboo, and there is a good reason for that. And the reason you can analyze and find that when the banks engage in this type of arbitrage between the short-term and long-term maturity. This, in other words, selling the short, buying the long. This is going to lead to a crisis, because arbitrage has a consequence. You see, if you buy something, the value of that asset is going to go up. If you sell something, then the value of this asset is going down. So the spread widens in terms of the price of the asset. But in terms of the rate of interest, it's just the opposite because of the seesaw. So in other words, when you do this illegitimate arbitrage, then sure, the price of these two assets widen, but the interest spread narrows. And when it gets close to zero, this is upsetting the stability of the market. And that's another topic in itself which you can go and analyze, because the market works with positive spreads, and zero spread is a very, very great exception. It destabilizes the market. So when this happens, the market reacts violently and makes the interest rate on the short-term instrument jump relative to the interest on the long-term instrument. So this is logically a contradiction. It means that the market pays you a higher rate of interest if you lend short-term than it would pay if you lend long-term. This is illogical, because why does the market quote higher rates for a long-term instrument? Because there is more risk involved. For a longer period of time, more critical things could happen, which would create losses. So the shorter the term, the safer the thing. So accordingly, the rate of interest is lower naturally for the shorter term. And if there's any inversion, as in this case, then this is not just illogical, but it's going to create a chaos in the markets. Another way to approach this is through the yield curve. The yield curve gives you the rate of interest which the market would pay for very short term, medium term, and so on, and long term instruments. And the yield curve is like this. It starts from 0, and then it increases, and it reaches a max. It doesn't go to infinity, but it reaches a maximum, which would be the interest paid on consols or perpetual bonds, which don't have a maturity. Okay, and the normal yield curve is this. But there is an inverted yield curve. And this is the crisis situation. And this is what I'm talking about, that this illegitimate interest arbitrage will make the spread, the interest rate spread, narrow. And as it approaches 0, the market acts violently. In every case, when the yield curve inverts, you notice that first it's just diminishing spread, and when it gets close to 0, the violent reaction and inverted yield curve. And that's a crisis. So this is the answer.
Isn't it the fractional reserve banking problem that or cause that mainstream Austrian used to point out and to explain a case of this mismatching problem that you are referring to? Backing long-term investment with deposits that...
Well, my answer would be that as long as the bank keeps its portfolio to honest to goodness real bills, there is no problem, because these real bills mature and they enable the bank to meet any demand for gold. Normal demand as well as abnormal demand. The trouble starts when the government and the banking system make a deal, a sweetheart deal, that the banks get a special treatment from the government. The government exempts the banks from contract law, which calls for the liquidation of a firm which cannot meet its contracts. Then the creditors have the right to call for the liquidation. Now, the government exempts the banks from that. They say if the banks cannot meet their contracts, we just declare a bank holiday. We just say that we suspend the gold standard for a certain period of time and let the banks use this grace period to reorganize their business. But the banks, the government doesn't make that concession as a gesture. It does it for a return favor. And the return favor is that the banking system will give a special treatment to government debt. It will treat the government debt differently from private debt. It will have first priority. It will consider the government bond as a cash item in the portfolio, as if it was a cash item. It's not a cash item because the bond market fluctuates and the value of the government bond can also fall and it can rise. So when it does, then the bank could be in a position that by liquidating its portfolio of government bonds, it will not be able to meet the demand, the cash demand for gold. Yet they made this concession to the government. It's, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. You know, a mutual favor. And as a consequence, the crisis situation arises when the demand for gold, for cash, is rising.
Gold reserve banking and still have business cycle if mismatching, if this process of mismatching occurs in the banking system orchestrated by the government.
I don't disagree with that. But I think the problem comes earlier, even earlier, because if you have 100% reserve banking, then you will have trouble during the next Christmas season. It's well known that during the Christmas season, the turnover is much greater than normally on the average. People are buying gifts and they spend more during the Christmas season. So if you want to finance all that trade with 100% gold, then there will be a tremendous squeeze on the circulating, on the pool of the circulating gold coins. And this problem doesn't arise under the real bills, because under the real bills, the Christmas season could last for 30 or 60 days, but that's well within the 91 days, so you just finance that extra volume of trade in terms of real bills. And by next January, all this can be settled, and there's no problem. But under the 100% reserve banking, this is not allowed. You have to have gold coins. And the squeeze on the pool of circulating gold coins will be such that there will be deflation, there will be collapse of the economy. Just as Keynes says, you know, this is one example where Keynes could be applied.
So, wouldn't be your critics of the gold standard used to say that inside the gold standard we would not be able to produce some research for medicines and some new technology and so on.
100% gold standard.
100% gold standard wouldn't be your theory combining the gold standard with the real bill doctrine a solution for this? That would make compatible the traditional Austrian theory with
absolutely. This is what I am suggesting, that the gold standard should incorporate the real bills doctrine. In other words, the short-term bills of exchange backed by maturing merchandise, which will be available to consumer within 91 days, they should be allowed to become reserves for the bank.
But some of these critics are speaking about investment, long-term investment. Like medicine research and...
No. That has to be financed out of savings. There's no question. There's no question. It's only the type of merchandise which you are certain that will be picked up by the ultimate consumer within 91 days. Now, well, of course, if aspirin, if you have statistics proving that there's flu every year and so many people will contract it and there will be demand for aspirin or whatever else, the fact that the real bill drawn on aspirin will be marketable, people will be willing to buy that bill, will make aspirin eligible for real bill circulation. The ultimate judge is always the market. But when you say medical research and all that, this is going too far. No, the ultimate proof is the bill market. You try, and the bill market can go backwards too. I remember a couple of decades ago, hula hoops, you know, and the girls on every street were playing with hula hoops, and there was a tremendous demand for hula hoops. And hula hoops could be produced, and you finance the production of hula hoop and marketing hula hoops through real bills. Fine. But the market could change, and the girls get tired of hula hoops and they pick up something else like skipping rope. And then the hula hoops are no longer marketable. How do you find out? Well, you just try to sell the bill, and you find out that there will be no takers for the bill. Too bad. This means the hula hoops are no longer, you cannot, if you want to produce them, you've got to go back to savings and finance the production and distribution of hula hoops through that way, not through real bills.
Who do you think that are the most important economists of the 18th, 19th, and 20th century?
Oh, now you
or
got
the
me.
most important economics of the 18th,
Yeah.
19th, and 20th century.
No, you got. I'm not really prepared to that, you know, because this is not something I'm doing every day. For the 20th century, let's start there. I would certainly put Mises, give him a very high place. I would not give Murray Rothbard such a high place, and I might be tempted to say Hayek is also very high, but I have more criticism and more important criticism about Hayek than I have about Mises. And basically this has to do with the fact that Hayek emphasizes the gold standard is a very imperfect means. And then he goes on and says why the gold standard is, well, I mean, there is no such thing as perfection in human affairs, but nobody can suggest anything better. Hayek thinks that if, I think that's the root of the free banking movement, you know, like Larry White and who's the other guy? Selgin. You know, Hayek. He says that if there was free competition among banks and they could just issue as much or as little purchasing media as they want, and then the market will pick the best and they will squeeze out the less efficient ones, and that's a good substitute for the gold. I don't think that would work without gold. In other words, if you want to have fiat money and you say that the free market will make a fiat money system efficient and permanent and durable, I have to disagree. And my reading of Hayek suggests that he is inclined to say that this is possible, and I would disagree. This is a very fundamental point. So therefore, although I value Hayek very highly, but I would not consider him as the top. Other than this, there are smaller figures, less well-known figures, and I might mention the name of Frank Vetter and Benjamin Anderson, and there's a Hungarian by the name Melchior Pályi. You are familiar with yeah, I think these were great, but not at that height. So if you really take the best of the best, then you could come up with one or two names, hardly three, but one and two. So that's the 20th century. Now going back to the 19th century, well, Adam Smith, where do we put Adam Smith? 17th?
More 18th, probably.
18th, that's right, 18th century. I would definitely consider him as a very great economist. Help me out with the 19th. I am at a loss to think.
19th, we have the possibility of Menger, or.
Oh, well, of course. Oh, absolutely. You don't have to say what century. You just say the whole history of the economic science. Menger is probably the king. He is above everybody else, head and shoulder higher than everybody else. Absolutely. And Böhm-Bawerk as well, but at a lower level, you know. Wieser, I'm not so sure about. The Austrian school produced some brilliant people, and but if you say let's just keep to the top one or two, then obviously it's Menger and Böhm-Bawerk.
Could you recommend literature for people that want to initiate in monetary and banking theory?
What literature they should read?
Would you recommend? Yes.
Yeah. Well,
for people that want to initiate in
initiate?
Yes, that wants to start learning about
Oh,
monetary
at the introductory level.
Yes, you could. Well, maybe you can tell me at the introductory level and readings for advanced level.
Yeah. Well, all the literature produced by all these, of course. Adam Smith is not very readable because that's a little bit using a different type of English. But um, uh, now, who else? I have some favorites. One of them would be Walter Spar. Are you familiar with that name? Okay, I would mention his output, which is very readable and even enjoyable reading and good for introduction, but it's strictly monetary. He was a monetary theorist, monetary scientist, but his grasp of economic theory was very solid, and therefore I can recommend him. The same way, I would say Melchior Pali, I already mentioned. Frank Fetter is certainly one I would include. I would not include Irving Fisher, but there is something in his output which could be considered, but not everything. You have to be selective there. Did I miss something important? See, I was not quite prepared for that question.
It's fantastic. It's fantastic. It's very good. Why did you go out of Hungary? And
when did I leave Hungary?
And how?
I left Hungary in 1956. This was the year of the uprising in Hungary by the Hungarian people against Soviet occupation and the communist regime which the Soviet army imposed on the country. And the resistance of the Hungarian people led to a general uprising which covered the whole country. And the communist government was chased away and so on, and it could not be restored except with the reoccupation of the country. Well, Hungary was always occupied, but it so happened that the garrison, the Soviet military, which was occupying Hungary, became sympathetic to the Hungarians. They had their own grievances and they identified with the Hungarian people. So they had to be hastily withdrawn and replaced by fresh Soviet troops who didn't know anything about Hungary. In fact, in some cases, they were told by their commanders that this here is the Suez Canal, which they refer to the river Danube. Mm-hmm. And these ignorant soldiers believed it, that they were fighting imperialism against imperialist aggression against Egypt, you know. So this kind of thing. Anyhow, there was an uprising and the communist government collapsed, but it was reimposed by Soviet interference. And at that time, the border, which was otherwise very closely guarded, even undermined with mines. So it was just like the Berlin Wall. If you try to cross it, you risk your own life. And that, for a short time, was dismantled, and it became possible to leave the country. So I did leave during that period, and then I went to first Austria and then to Canada.
By plane?
From Austria to...
No, going out of the country.
By what?
By plane or?
No, walking over the border.
And your background is as a mathematician. How did you become and when interested in monetary theory? Well,
I was always interested in monetary theory because as a child, during the years 1946-47, Hungary had the dubious distinction of attaching the greatest number of zeros after one. In other words, they were printing banknotes which were in the order of trillions, using the American terminology. And that's more than the Weimar German inflation of 1923 was. I don't know, perhaps Zimbabwe will beat that record, but the Hungarians certainly established a record at that time. And I remember my father got his salary twice a day. He got paid twice a day. And I had to stand in front of his office, and when he got his salary, he called me in and gave it to me, and he just told me that I have to go to the market and buy whatever. Just buy, spend that money, because he realized that. So the best thing to buy at that time was cigarettes. Cigarette was fast becoming very marketable. So some people started producing cigarettes at home, buying the tobacco, cutting it, and then they had a little instrument with which they could fill the paper with tobacco and then going to the market. So I remember this, and then I also remember that those who had gold, they could eat, and those who didn't have gold, they just had to go hungry. And as a child, I was a child at the time, 13 years old, I mean, this leaves a very deep impression. So ever since, I was interested in gold. Of course, during the communist regime, you had very limited opportunity to study gold, and certainly you wouldn't hear the name such as Mises or Menger or anybody of these great monetary scientists. So when I left Hungary after 1956, one of the things I did was immerse myself in this literature. So I just absorbed all this, which I was not able to do during my university years. And I never gave up on this. I continued. But of course, as economist in the vein of Mises or Menger, you couldn't make a living. So I just had to fall back on my training as a mathematician. I liked my profession as a mathematician. It's not that, but I always had this second interest. It just carried through my whole life and career, and I hope that since I took early retirement, I could contribute something which will survive me. You know, I am just hoping, and I thank you very much for the opportunity you gave me to expose my ideas to a very highly good, well-informed and very highly motivated and interested audience such as this one, which is a wonderful opportunity. And I welcome the debate, I welcome sharing this, and I'm looking forward to future cooperation.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure.